Hello everyone. I'm Ted. And today we will be discussing Chapter 13. Human Resource Audit. And in this chapter we will be discussing Introduction, Objectives, Need, Benefits, Scope, Approaches to HR Audit, HR Audit Process, Frequency of Audit, HR Audit, Problems. Let's start. Introduction. Personnel records and reports provide information regarding the utilization of human resources in an objective way. However, in most cases this is not sufficient. A critical evaluation of manpower programs might be required to find out the areas where improvements are needed and to set things in order. In place of informal impressions gathered and summarized through records and reports, a systematic and analytical search is made to find out the effectiveness of personnel management. According to Siebold, personnel/HR audit refers to an examination and evaluation of policies, procedures, and practices to determine the effectiveness of personnel management. Personnel audit covers basically three things: measurement and evaluation of personnel programs, policies, and practices; identification of gap between objectives and results; determination of what should or what should not be done in future. Moving next. Objectives of personnel, HR audit. According to Gray, the basic objective of personnel audit is to know how the various units are functioning and how they have been able to meet the policies and guidelines which were agreed upon, and to assist the rest of the organization by identifying the gaps between objectives and results, for the end product of an evaluation should be to formulate plans for corrections of adjustments. The objectives of personnel audit are: to review the organizational system, human resources subsystem in order to find out the efficiency of the organization in attracting and retaining human resources; to find out the effectiveness of various personnel policies and practices; to know how various units are functioning and how they have been able to implement the personnel policies; to review the personnel system in comparison with organizations and modify them to meet the challenges of personnel management. Moving next. Need for personnel, HR audit. According to Yoder, the need for personnel audit is largely influenced by several conditions. Some of these are: the number of employees. Very small units, because of the very small number of persons they employ, require comparatively little in the way of a formal audit. Organizational structure. Continuing feedback is facilitated if an organization has a personnel department. Communication and feedback. An effective two-way communications system often reduces the need for a formal audit. Location and dispersion. The need for a formal audit is directly related to the number of isolated plants. Status of an industrial relations manager, if he participates in a top man. Agreement plans, reports, discussions, and decisions. The need for a formal audit may be less frequently felt. Administrative style. The greater the delegation of authority and decentralization of power, the greater the value of a regular and formal audit. Moving next. Benefits. The benefits of a human resource management audit may be summarized thus: identifies the contributions of the HR department, improves the professional image of HR department, encourages greater responsibility and professionalization among members of HR department, classifies the HR department's duties and responsibilities, stimulates uniformity of personnel policies and practices, finds critical personnel problems, ensures timely compliance with legal requirements, reduces human resource costs. Moving next. Approaches to HR audit. There are 5 approaches to HR audit. Comparative approach. In this approach, HR auditors identify one model company and the results obtained of the firm under audit are compared with it. Outside authority approach. In this approach, a benchmark is set to compare own results. A standard for audit designed by an outside consultant becomes the benchmark. Statistical approach. In this approach, the statistical information maintained by the firm in respect of absenteeism, employee turnover, etc. will be used as measures for evaluating performance. Compliance approach. In this approach, the auditors make a review of past action to determine to see whether those activities are in compliance with the legal requirements and are in sync with the policies and procedures of the firm. MBO, management by objectives, approach. In this approach, specific targets are fixed. The performance is measured against these targets. The auditors conduct the survey of actual performance and compare with the targets set. Moving next. Scope of personnel, HR audit. The scope of personnel HR audit of personnel audit is very wide. It covers areas like personnel philosophy, practices, and personnel results. The major areas of personnel include programming, forecasting, and scheduling to meet organization and needs. The areas of recruitment, selection, careers, promotions, training, and development also come within the scope of personnel audit. Further, the areas of leadership, welfare, grievances, performance appraisal, employee mobility, industrial relations are also included within the scope of personnel audit. The areas and levels of personnel audit, according to Dale Yoder, are fairly exhaustive. Table showing levels and examples of audit data. Major areas. Level 1, results. Level 2, programs and procedures. Level 3, policy. Planning. Forecasting and scheduling to meet organization and personnel shortages, supplies, layoff, etc. Time-bound or network cost/benefit budget, etc. Explicit statement to provide inclusive personnel plans for present and future. Staffing and development. Defined requirements and careers, sources, requirement, selection, training, promotions. Recruitment times costs, training times cost, labor turnover, etc. In-house and out-house training programs, guidance in careers, etc. Let cream rise, non-discrimination, etc. Organizing. Maintaining structures for coordinating, communicating, collaborating, etc. Feedback, reader interest, extent of formal, organization, reports, records, etc. Job definitions for individuals, departments, task forces, house organs, etc. Encourage flexibility, reduce resistance to change, effective three-way communication, etc. Motivation and commitment. Individual and group motivation, interest, effort, contribution. Productivity, performance, comparative costs, etc. Job enlargement, wage and salary administration, morale survey, exit interviews, fringe benefits, etc. Gain high personal identification, ensure whole man satisfactions. Administrative. Style of leadership and supervision, delegation. Suggestions, promotions, grievances, negotiation, participative involvement, management cooperation. Consultative supervision, collective bargaining, discipline, union committees, etc. Style adapted to changing expectations, union management, collective bargaining, etc. Research and innovation. Experiments and theory testing in all areas. Changes, experiments, research reports, publications. R&D approach in all areas, suggestion plans, etc. Test old and new theory, encourage creativity in management. Scope of HR audit. Alignment with corporate strategy. HR strategy must be consistent with corporate strategy and continually examined. Managerial compliance. Managers must comply with HR policies, procedures, and legal requirements. Employee satisfaction. Human resource departments should attempt to meet employee objectives where feasible. Utility of records. Several personnel records are used in the process of personnel audit. They include payroll, total, and unit labor cost, interview reports, test scores, training records, labor productivity, work stoppage due to strikes, lockout, layoff, accident reports, turnover reports, absenteeism reports, etc. Moving next. Additional questions. When to conduct the HR audit? Given the resources required for a full-scale audit, most organizations will not want to go through this process more than once a year. However, mini audits that allow for some course correction can be accomplished without too much departmental pain approximately every 6 months. Scheduling annual checkups to maintain the discipline of a regular review is preferable to only occasional or panic audits, e.g., those that take place only when a potential problem is brewing. Another strategy is to conduct an audit following any significant event, e.g., new plans, management changes. What to expect from HR audit? A comprehensive audit is a time-consuming and intensely focused project that may require the review of numerous documents and policies, as well as soliciting feedback from HR staff, selected employees, and managers from other departments. The amount of time involved and the effort required on the size and of organization, the type of information the organization hopes to glean, the scope of the audit and the number of people on the audit team. A full-scale legal compliance audit in particular covers a great deal of territory and takes longer to complete as compared with a best practices audit, which benchmarks one specific practice against another employer's approach, or a function-specific audit, which reviews only one key area of the employer's HR practices. Cost of an audit? The actual cost of an HR audit depends on the scope of the review, the number of interviewed and the size of the audit team. Consequently, the expense varies greatly from one situation to another. Suffice it to say, though, that the cost of conducting any full-scale HR compliance audit will be far less than defending, let alone losing, even one lawsuit. Some insurance carriers provide audits as a part of their compliance programs, so the audit could actually free. Who should conduct an audit? The organization's HR professionals can perform an audit in-house if they have the expertise, the time, a willingness to objectively acknowledge inadequacies in current procedures and, most importantly, the clout to make or influence the necessary organizational changes. However, if the audit is conducted with internal resources or even with an outside consultant who is not a lawyer, everything connected with the audit is subject to discovery in litigation relating to employment practices. If an organization has legitimate concerns about what its HR audit may reveal regarding the company's non-compliance with various employment laws and regulations, the organization should follow fairly strict audit procedures and protocols and consider hiring outside legal counsel to conduct the audit. Moving next. HR audit process. The personnel audit should probe much deeper, evaluating personnel policies, programs, philosophy, practices, and concepts, comparing with standards and with those of the personnel records of the said organization and other organizations. The level and the depth of the investigation should be decided in advance. The process of audit, usually carried out through an attitudinal survey or by interpreting data, includes identifying indices, indicators, statistical ratios, and gross numbers in some cases. Examining the variations in time frame in comparison corresponding period. Comparing the variations of different departments during different periods. Examining the variations of different periods and comparing them with similar units and industries in the same region. Drawing trend lines, frequency distributions, and calculating statistical correlations. Preparing and submitting a detailed report to the top management and to the managers at appropriate levels for information and necessary action. Various personnel policies, procedures, and practices can be evaluated by asking various questions of the following type. What are they? For example, policies, procedures/practices. How are they established? How are they communicated to various managers and employers concerned? How are they understood by individual employers, supervisors, and managers at various levels? Are they consistent with the management's organizational philosophy and human resource management philosophy? Are they consistent with the existing trends towards human resource management and research? What are the controls that exist for ensuring their effective and uniform application? What measures exist to modify them to meet the organizational requirements? Most organizations that employ HR audit to examine the employment statistics pertaining to a period making use of ratios, given below. Effectiveness ratios. Ratio of number of employees to total output in general. Sales in dollars per employee for the whole company or by organizational unit, business. Output in units per employee hour worked for the entire organizational unit. Scrap loss per unit of the organization. Payroll costs by unit per employee grade. Accident ratios. Frequency of accident rate for the organization as a whole or by unit. Number of lost time accidents. Compensation paid for accidents per 1,000 hours worked. Accidents by type. Accidents classified by type of injury to each part of the body. Average cost of accident by part of the body involved. Organizational labor relations ratios. Number of grievances filed. Number of arbitration awards lost. Turnover and absenteeism ratios. Attendance, tardiness, and overtime comparisons by organizational unit as a measure of how well an operation is handling employees. Employee turnover by unit and for the organization. Employment ratios. Vacations granted as a percentage of employees eligible. Sick leave days granted as a percentage of labor days worked. Maternity leaves granted per 100 employees. Educational leaves granted per 100 employees. Personal leaves granted per 100 employees. Employment distribution by chronological age. Employment distribution by length of service with organization. Employment distribution by sex, race, national origin, religion. Managerial distribution by chronological age, sex, race, national origin, religion. Average age of workforce. Average age of managerial workforce. Moving next. Frequency of audit. Generally, top management thinks of personnel audit only when serious crisis occurs like strikes, increase in the number and/or magnitude of grievances or conflicts, etc. This type of audit is just like post-mortem of the situation. But a regular program of auditing helps the management to find out some significant trends. The probability of some serious incidents hitting the organization could be visualized and some remedial steps could be initiated. This ensures smooth running of an organization in addition to controlling stressful situations, crises, and conflicts. The management has to, therefore, arrange for regular annual audit of almost all the personnel policies and practices. Certain indicators like absenteeism and employees' grievances should be audited at the end of every month/quarter depending upon the magnitude of the issues. Types of audit. Personnel audit may be done either by internal people or by external people. Internal audit is done by the employees in the personnel department. This kind of audit is called internal audit. The audit may be conducted by external specialists or consultants in personnel management. This type of audit is called external audit. Audit report. The audit has to examine the various personnel reports, personnel policies, and practices. Then the auditor has to record his observations, findings, prepare a report compiling all these findings and advance useful for the improvement of personnel management practices. The auditor submits written report of his findings, conclusions, and recommendations. The most common elements of the report are given below. Table of contents. Preface. Statement of the objectives, methodology, scope, and techniques used. A synopsis containing the summary and conclusions of the audit that has been carried out. A clear and in-depth analysis of the data and information, furnished area-wise or department-wise. Evaluation, discussions, and analysis. This part covers findings, suggestions offered by the auditor. Appendix. This includes supporting data and information which is not necessary in the main part of the report. Bibliography. Important books and journals which are necessary for future reading are also included at the end. Moving next. Problems in personnel audit. The rules, systems, and regulations for financial audit are well developed. But it is very difficult to audit personnel policies and practices. Personnel audit involves comparison with past ratios, rates of turnover, expenditure, etc., with those of other departments and organizations. The organization by itself cannot be taken as standard for comparison and a decision arrived at. Hence, it is difficult to conduct a personnel audit. There may be a tendency to turn the survey into a fault-finding process. Every employee may then try to pass the buck. The audit may create more troubles than solutions. The audit has to be done carefully. It must evaluate things in an objective way, find out what has gone wrong and suggest improvements. The emphasis must be on rectifying things rather than fault-finding. Instead of indulging in a blame game, the auditor would do well to focus on specifics, putting the finger on the problem causing trouble and suggesting ways and means to cross the hurdles. Provide an action plan for each identified risk along with expected time and costs. That way, clients can couple the detailed audit report with a security action plan, and essentially have a playbook they can follow to actually make the organization better. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. This video is brought to you by Bookstune. Like this video to encourage us. Share this video to spread the knowledge. And subscribe to this channel for latest update.